I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the Pinehurst Springs Community Center and saw Sharon Matthews whispering furiously with 3 other board members in the corner, their eyes darting toward me like I had just walked in covered in blood. My name is Zachary Garrison, and I had been serving on the Homeowners Association board of our gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona, for the past 3 years. What started as a simple desire to fix some drainage issues in my cul-de-sac had evolved into a passion for actually making our neighborhood a better place to live. Unlike most HOA board members who seem to view the position as a power trip, I genuinely cared about the residents and tried to balance reasonable rules with common sense. Sharon Matthews, our 52-year-old HOA president, had other ideas about how things should run. She was the textbook definition of what people imagine when they hear the words HOA president, complete with the shoulder-length blonde hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly grocery budget, designer athleisure wear that she wore to every single meeting, and an expression that perpetually looked like she had just smelled something unpleasant. Over the past 6 months, we had clashed repeatedly over her increasingly authoritarian approach to neighborhood management. The meeting that night in late September was supposed to be routine. We were gathered in the beige-walled community center, fluorescent lights humming overhead, cheap folding chairs arranged in rows facing the table where the 5 board members sat. About 30 residents had shown up, which was actually a decent turnout for Pinehurst Springs. "Let's call this meeting to order," Sharon announced, rapping her gavel with more force than necessary. She smoothed down her lavender athletic top and smiled that tight smile she reserved for when she was about to make someone's life difficult. "We have several important items on tonight's agenda." I sat in my usual spot at the board table, 2 seats down from Sharon, with my notepad and a copy of our community's bylaws. I had learned early on that having the actual rules written down was essential when dealing with Sharon's creative interpretations of HOA regulations. "First order of business," Sharon continued, "I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Zachary Garrison from the board for gross misconduct and violation of his fiduciary duties." The room went silent. I felt my stomach drop as every head in the room turned toward me. "Excuse me," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you talking about?" Sharon's smile widened slightly. "You have been acting against the interests of this community, Mr. Garrison. You have consistently voted against measures designed to maintain property values. You have encouraged residents to violate our architectural guidelines, and most recently, you have been conducting unauthorized inspections of our financial records." "Unauthorized?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Sharon, I'm a board member. I have every right to review our finances. That's part of my responsibility to the homeowners who elected me. You access the management company's database without proper authorization," she shot back. "That constitutes a breach of trust and potentially illegal access to confidential information." I had indeed been digging into our HOA's finances over the past month, but only because something had seemed off. Our monthly assessments had increased by 40% over the past year, yet I couldn't see any corresponding improvements to our community amenities. The pool still had cracked tiles. The landscaping looked worse than ever, and the promised resurfacing of our tennis courts had been delayed 3 times. When I had finally gotten access to our accounts, I discovered why Sharon had been so defensive about the finances. "I found some interesting things in those records," I said, pulling out a folder from my bag. "Would you like me to share them with everyone here?" Sharon's face went pale, then flushed red. "You will do no such thing. Those are confidential board matters." "Confidential?" A voice spoke up from the audience. It was Robert Chen, a retired accountant who lived on Seguero Drive. The financial records of an HOA are supposed to be available to all homeowners upon request. That's Arizona law. Thank you, Robert, I said. And what I found was that over the past year, approximately $65,000 in HOA funds have been paid to a company called Desert Elite Consulting. Can you tell us what services Desert Elite Consulting provides? Sharon, her jaw tightened. They provide management consulting services to help us run the HOA more efficiently. Really? Because I looked up Desert Elite Consulting with the Arizona Corporation Commission. The company was registered 8 months ago, and the registered agent is one Trevor Matthews. Your son, Sharon. The murmur that went through the room was immediate and loud. Sharon stood up, her hands gripping the edge of the table. How dare you imply that there's anything improper about that arrangement? Trevor is a licensed business consultant. He's 26 years old and his LinkedIn profile says he works at a gym in Temp, I countered. And even if he were qualified, you never disclosed the conflict of interest to the board or the homeowners. You're funneling HOA money to your own family. This is slander, Sharon shouted. I will not sit here and be accused of, it's not slander if it's true, interrupted Margaret Silverman, another board member who had always been quietly skeptical of Sharon's management style. Zachary, do you have documentation of this? I do. I filed a complaint with our HOA management company 3 days ago. I also consulted with an attorney about the proper procedure for addressing financial misconduct by board members. That was when Sharon played her hand. Which brings us back to the vote for your removal, she said, her voice icy calm now. All in favor of removing Zachary Garrison from the board for cause. Sharon raised her hand. Immediately, 2 other board members raised their hands as well. Tom Bradley and Jennifer Reeves, both of whom had always voted in lockstep with Sharon. That gave her 3 votes out of 5. Motion carries, Sharon announced. Mr. Garrison, you are hereby removed from the board. Please collect your materials and leave the premises immediately. You can't do this, I said, but my mind was racing. According to our bylaws, it took a supermajority of 4 out of 5 board members to remove someone for cause. 3 votes shouldn't have been enough. I just did, Sharon said. Tom, please escort Mr. Garrison out if he refuses to leave voluntarily. Tom Bradley, a barrel-chested guy in his 60s who had been a corrections officer before retirement, stood up with an apologetic look on his face. Come on, Zach. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked at Margaret, hoping she would speak up, but she was staring down at the table, unwilling to meet my eyes. The 5th board member, Dennis Porter, was doing the same thing. This isn't over, I said, grabbing my folder and my bag. Not by a long shot. As I walked out of the community center, I could hear Sharon resuming the meeting as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from anger. I had just been railroaded out of a position I had been elected to by the homeowners, and Sharon had violated our own governing documents to do it. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, watching through the windows as the meeting continued inside. Finally, after about 40 minutes, people started filing out. Robert Chen spotted me and walked over to my car. That was complete bullshit in there, he said when I rolled down my window. Half the people inside are furious. Margaret tried to argue that the vote wasn't valid, but Sharon shut her down. Did anyone else speak up? I asked. A few people. But Sharon moved the rest of the meeting along quickly and adjourned before there could be any real discussion. Zach, you need to fight this. If what you said about her son is true, she needs to be held accountable. It's all true. I have bank statements, invoices, everything. Robert leaned against my car. I worked as a forensic accountant for 20 years before I retired. If you want help going through those records more thoroughly, I'm offering. I might take you up on that, I said. Right now, I need to figure out my legal options. The next morning, I called the attorney I had consulted the previous week. Her name was Patricia Donovan, and she specialized in HOA law, which apparently was complicated enough to warrant its own legal specialty. Her office was in downtown Scottsdale, in one of those modern glass buildings that probably cost a fortune to cool during Arizona summers. Patricia was in her mid-40s, with short dark hair and the kind of direct manner that made me trust her immediately. We sat in her conference room and I laid out everything that had happened. "So they removed you with only 3 votes?" she asked, making notes on a legal pad. "Yes. Our bylaws clearly state that removal for cause requires 4 out of 5 votes. I checked 3 times to make sure I wasn't misreading it. And you have documentation of the payments to this Desert Elite Consulting Company. Complete bank records, invoices, the works." Robert Chen, the accountant I mentioned, and I went through everything last night. We found even more questionable expenses. There's another company that's been paid about $40,000 for landscape consulting, but we can't find any evidence that they've actually done any work. Patricia tapped her pen against her pad. "Zachary, this is potentially criminal fraud, not just a civil matter. If Sharon Matthews has been embezzling HOA funds, that's theft. The amounts you're describing would make it a felony. So what do I do?" "First, we need to challenge your removal from the board. I'll file a complaint in Superior Court arguing that the vote was invalid under your governing documents. Second, we need to report the financial irregularities. That can go to the Arizona Attorney General's office and potentially to local law enforcement. Third, we should call for an emergency meeting of the homeowners to discuss the financial issues. Sharon will never allow that meeting to happen. She doesn't have a choice. Under Arizona HOA law, if 10% of homeowners petition for a special meeting, the board must hold one within 30 days. How many homes are in Pinehurst Springs? 216. So you need 22 homeowners to sign a petition. Think you can get that?" I thought about Robert, Margaret, and the angry faces I had seen last night. "Yeah, I can get that. Then let's get to work." Over the next week, I became intimately familiar with every street in Pinehurst Springs. I printed out a petition requesting a special meeting to discuss the HOA's finances and the validity of my removal from the board. Robert came with me for most of it, and we knocked on doors every evening after work. The response was overwhelming. Most homeowners had no idea what was happening behind the scenes of their HOA, but once I explained the situation and showed them the documentation, they were eager to sign. Some people shared their own frustrations with Sharon's management style. Others were shocked that their assessment increases were potentially funding payments to Sharon's son rather than community improvements. Within 4 days, I had 47 signatures, more than double what we needed. Patricia filed the petition with the HOA management company and sent a copy directly to Sharon, along with a formal notice that the special meeting was required by law. Sharon's response came 3 days later in the form of a certified letter to me. The letter informed me that I was banned from all HOA property, including the community center, pool, tennis courts, and even the common areas within the neighborhood. The letter cited threatening behavior and harassment of board members as justification. "This is insane," I said to Patricia over the phone. "I haven't threatened anyone, and she can't ban me from common areas that I pay assessments to maintain." "She's desperate," Patricia replied, "which means we're getting to her." The hearing for your removal challenge is scheduled for October 18th. And I have good news. I spoke with the Arizona Attorney General's office this morning. They're opening an investigation into the financial irregularities you reported. October 18th fell on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after my removal from the board. Patricia and I arrived at the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix early that morning. The courthouse was an imposing building with high ceilings, and that particular echo that all government buildings seem to have. Sharon was there with her own attorney, a severe-looking man in an expensive suit named Richard Holloway. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, Sharon wearing a navy blue dress that was probably meant to make her look professional and trustworthy. She wouldn't look at me. The judge assigned to our case was the Honorable Deanna Reese, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair pulled back in a bun and reading glasses that she peered over as she reviewed the case documents. This is a petition to invalidate the removal of Mr. Zachary Garrison from the board of directors of the Pinehurst Springs Homeowners Association, Judge Reese said. Miss Donovan, you're representing Mr. Garrison. Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Holloway, you represent the HOA and Mrs. Matthews. Correct, Your Honor. Let's proceed. Miss Donovan, make your case. Patricia stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. The bylaws of Pinehurst Springs HOA, which were properly adopted and are binding on all board members, clearly state that removal of a board member for cause requires a supermajority vote of 4 out of 5 directors. Mr. Garrison was removed with only 3 votes, making the action invalid on its face. She handed copies of the bylaws to the judge and to Holloway. As you can see in Article 7, Section 3, the language is unambiguous. Furthermore, the reasons given for Mr. Garrison's removal, which were stated as gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty, are not supported by any evidence. Mr. Garrison was in fact fulfilling his fiduciary duty by investigating financial irregularities that he had observed. Your Honor, Holloway interrupted, standing up. The board acted within its authority to remove a member who was disrupting the orderly conduct of HOA business. Mr. Garrison made baseless accusations against Mrs. Matthews without proper evidence and created a hostile environment. The accusations are not baseless, Patricia countered. We have submitted to this court and to the Arizona Attorney General's office complete documentation showing that Mrs. Matthews approved payments totaling over $100,000 to companies owned by her family members without disclosing the conflicts of interest to the board or homeowners. Judge Reese held up her hand. I'm not here to adjudicate potential fraud claims. I'm here to determine whether Mr. Garrison's removal from the board was conducted according to the HOA's governing documents. Mr. Holloway, how do you respond to the argument that only 3 votes were obtained when 4 were required? Holloway looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, the board interpreted the bylaws to mean that 4 votes were required only for removal without cause. For removal with cause, a simple majority was deemed sufficient. Where in the bylaws does it make that distinction? Judge Reese asked, flipping through the pages in front of her. It's implicit in the structure of the document, Your Honor. Implicit? Judge Reese removed her glasses and looked at Holloway with an expression that suggested she was not impressed. Counselor, I've been interpreting contracts and governing documents for 23 years. When a document says that removal for cause requires a supermajority, that's exactly what it means. There is no language here suggesting a different standard for different types of removal. She turned to Patricia. Miss Donovan, you've also requested that the court take additional action beyond simply invalidating the removal. Yes, Your Honor. Given the serious financial irregularities that have been uncovered and given that Mrs. Matthews controls a voting bloc on the current board that has enabled these irregularities to continue, we're asking the court to invalidate the most recent board election and to appoint Mr. Garrison as temporary president until a new election can be held under proper supervision. That's an extraordinary request, Judge Reese said. These are extraordinary circumstances, Your Honor. We have evidence that the election held last April was conducted improperly. Proxy votes were collected by Mrs. Matthews herself, rather than by an independent third party, as required by the bylaws. Several homeowners have submitted affidavits stating that their proxy votes were counted differently than how they had marked them, and the election results were never properly certified or published to the membership. Sharon leaned over and whispered something urgently to Holloway. He shook his head slightly and stood again. Your Honor, there is no basis for invalidating the entire election. Mrs. Matthews has served this community for 6 years and has always acted in good faith. The Attorney General's office doesn't investigate people who act in good faith, Patricia said sharply. Your Honor, we're not asking for permanent relief. We're simply asking for the appointment of a temporary president who can ensure that the HOA's finances are properly managed and that a fair election can be held. The homeowners of Pinehurst Springs deserve to have confidence in their board. Judge Reese was quiet for a long moment, reading through the documents in front of her. Finally, she looked up. I'm prepared to rule. First, I find that the removal of Mr. Garrison was invalid. The bylaws clearly required 4 votes and only 3 were obtained. Mr. Garrison is hereby reinstated to the board effective immediately. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but Patricia remained focused on the judge. Second, I have reviewed the evidence regarding the election irregularities and the financial concerns. While I'm not making any findings as to fraud or criminal conduct, I am troubled by what I see here. The evidence suggests that the current board structure has enabled concerning practices to continue unchecked. Sharon's face had gone from red to white. Holloway was scribbling notes furiously. Therefore, I am invalidating the April election and ordering a new election to be held within 60 days under the supervision of an independent election monitor. Furthermore, I am appointing Mr. Zachary Garrison as temporary president of the Pinehurst Springs Homeowners Association, effective immediately, to serve until the new election is completed and the results are certified. The relief was replaced by shock. I hadn't actually expected Judge Reese to go that far. Mrs. Matthews, you are removed from the position of president but remain on the board as a regular member unless and until the homeowners elect otherwise. Mr. Garrison, as temporary president, you will have full authority to manage the HOA's operations, including access to all financial records and the ability to engage or terminate contractors. You will report to this court monthly on your activities until the new election is completed. She banged her gavel. This matter is concluded. My clerk will prepare the written order. Sharon stood up so quickly that her chair tipped backward. This is outrageous, she said, her voice shaking. You can't just hand control of our HOA to him. I just did, Mrs. Matthews, Judge Reese said calmly. And I suggest you cooperate fully with Mr. Garrison and with the Attorney General's investigation. This court takes allegations of financial misconduct in HOAs very seriously. If the evidence supports criminal charges, I expect the appropriate authorities will act accordingly. Outside the courthouse, Patricia and I stood on the steps in the bright October sunshine. I was still processing what had just happened. Did that really just happen? I asked. Patricia laughed. It really did. Congratulations, Mr. President. I don't even know where to start. Start by securing all the financial records. Contact the management company today and inform them of the court order. Get copies of everything. Then we need to conduct a full audit of the HOA's accounts. I know a forensic accountant who specializes in this kind of work. He can work with Robert Chen to trace where all the money went. What about Sharon? Is she going to face charges? That depends on what the AG's investigation turns up and whether they refer it to criminal prosecution. Based on what you've shown me, I'd say charges are likely. But that's not your concern right now. Your job is to stabilize the HOA, restore the homeowner's trust, and make sure nothing else goes missing. The first thing I did when I got home was call Robert Chen and fill him in on what had happened. He was thrilled. "This is incredible, Zach. You actually pulled it off." "We pulled it off. I couldn't have done this without your help. Listen, the judge wants a full audit of the HOA finances. Patricia is bringing in a forensic accountant, but I'd like you to be involved too." "Absolutely. When do we start? How about tomorrow morning?" That evening, I drafted an email to all Pinehurst Springs homeowners explaining what had happened in court and outlining my immediate priorities as temporary president. Those priorities were simple: transparency, accountability, and getting our community's finances back on track. I explained that I would hold an open meeting the following week where homeowners could ask questions and voice concerns. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox flooded with messages of support from homeowners who were grateful that someone was finally standing up to Sharon's mismanagement. A few people expressed skepticism or concern about the disruption, but even they seemed willing to give me a chance. The next morning, I went to the offices of Premier HOA Management, the company that handled day-to-day operations for Pinehurst Springs. The office manager, a woman named Linda Torres, looked nervous when I walked in. "Mr. Garrison, I heard what happened in court yesterday." Sharon called here and she was very upset. "I'm sure she was," I said. "Linda, I need complete access to all of Pinehurst Springs records. Bank statements, invoices, contracts, emails, everything. Judge Reese's order gives me full authority as temporary president." I handed her a copy of the court order. She read it carefully, then nodded. "Of course. I'll have everything pulled together for you. Mr. Garrison, can I speak candidly, please? Some of us here have been uncomfortable with certain things Sharon asked us to do." "Nothing illegal," she added quickly. "But she would sometimes instruct us to process payments without proper documentation, or she would handle things directly rather than going through normal channels. We raised concerns, but she was the president, and we worked for the HOA board, so—" "I understand. Linda, if you or anyone else on your staff has information about irregular financial practices, I need to know about it. There's an investigation happening, and the best thing anyone can do is be honest and cooperative." "There's a box of documents in our storage room," Linda said quietly. "Sharon asked us to shred them last month, but we hadn't gotten around to it yet. They're invoices and contracts from various vendors. Some of them looked questionable." My heart started beating faster. "Can I see them?" Linda led me to a back storage room and pointed to a banker's box on a shelf. "That's it. I probably shouldn't be showing you this without consulting our attorney, but given the court order, I think it's appropriate." I opened the box and started flipping through the documents. It was a treasure trove of evidence. Invoices from Desert Elite Consulting for vague services like strategic planning and operational assessment. A contract with a company called Verd Landscape Solutions, which was apparently the $40,000 landscape consulting firm I had seen in the bank records. And most damning of all, several invoices that appeared to have been altered, with dates changed and amounts increased from the original figures. Linda, I need to take this box with me. I'm going to have forensic accountants go through everything. Of course. Mr. Garrison, I just want you to know that most of us who work here really do care about the communities we serve. What Sharon did, that's not normal. Most HOA boards are people who genuinely want to help their neighbors. I appreciate that. And I'm going to need Premier's cooperation going forward to make sure this doesn't happen again. Over the next few days, I worked with Patricia's forensic accountant, a methodical man named James Wu, and Robert Chen to piece together the full scope of Sharon's financial misconduct. What we found was worse than I had initially realized. Desert Elite Consulting, Sharon's son's company, had been paid $67,000 over 8 months for services that were never actually performed. Verd Landscape Solutions was owned by Sharon's brother-in-law and had been paid $42,000 for a comprehensive landscape redesign plan that was never delivered. And there was a third company, Summit Property Improvements, that had been paid $31,000 for pool renovation consulting, even though no pool renovations had taken place. In total, we documented approximately $140,000 in fraudulent or questionable payments over a period of 18 months. All of the companies were connected to Sharon's family members or close friends, and none of them had performed the services they had been paid for. This is textbook embezzlement, James Wu said as we sat in my dining room surrounded by spreadsheets and documents. She was using the HOA as her personal piggy bank. The Attorney General is definitely going to pursue charges. What kind of charges are we talking about? I asked. Fraud, theft, possibly money laundering depending on how the money flowed through these shell companies. Given the amounts involved, these would all be felonies. She's looking at serious prison time if convicted. I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was angry about what Sharon had done, stealing from hundreds of families who trusted the HOA to manage their money responsibly. But I also felt a twinge of pity. She had destroyed her own life out of greed. The open meeting I held the following week drew nearly 100 homeowners, far more than the community center could comfortably hold. People lined the walls and sat in the aisles. The energy in the room was electric. I stood at the front table with Margaret Silverman and Dennis Porter, the two board members who had seemed uncomfortable with Sharon's removal of me, but hadn't spoken up at the time. Tom Bradley and Jennifer Reeves, Sharon's allies, had both resigned from the board the day after Judge Reese's ruling. Sharon herself was not present, though she was technically still a board member. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "I know the past few weeks have been chaotic and concerning. I want to be completely transparent with you about what's happened and what we're doing to fix it." I walked through the timeline of events, my discovery of the financial irregularities, my removal from the board, the court case, and Judge Reese's ruling appointing me as temporary president. Then I explained what the audit had revealed. The room erupted in angry murmurs when I described the fraudulent payments. One homeowner, a man named David Foster who lived on Mesquite Lane, stood up. "So Sharon Matthews just stole $140,000 from us. Our money that we pay in assessments every month. That's what the evidence shows, yes. The Attorney General's office has all of our documentation, and I've been told they're moving forward with criminal charges." "When?" someone else shouted. "When is she going to be arrested?" "I don't have control over the timing of the criminal investigation," I said. "But I can tell you that it's being taken seriously. In the meantime, my focus is on recovering as much of the stolen money as possible and making sure our HOA operates transparently going forward." I outlined my plan for the next 60 days until the new election. First, we would complete the full audit and publish the results to all homeowners. Second, we would pursue civil litigation against Sharon and the shell companies to recover the stolen funds. Third, we would implement new financial controls, including requiring 2 board member signatures on any payment over $500 and monthly publication of our financial statements to all homeowners. "What about our assessments?" asked a woman named Carol Young. "Are they going to keep going up to cover what was stolen?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm implementing an immediate freeze on assessments. We have enough in reserves to maintain operations for the next several months. Once we recover the stolen funds and complete the new election, the new board can make decisions about future assessments. But I'm not going to ask you to pay more to cover someone else's theft." The applause that followed was gratifying. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I was actually helping people rather than just fighting battles. After the meeting, dozens of homeowners came up to thank me and offer their support. Margaret Silverman pulled me aside. "Zach, I owe you an apology. I should have backed you up when Sharon tried to remove you. I was afraid of creating conflict, and that was cowardly." "I appreciate that, Margaret, but you're standing with me now, and that's what matters. I want to help however I can. I know we need to fill the 2 vacant board seats. I'd like to nominate Robert Chen and Carol Young. They both clearly care about this community, and we could use people who will ask tough questions." "That's a great idea. Let's reach out to them." 2 days later, on a gray October afternoon, I was working from home when I saw a Maricopa County Sheriff's vehicle pull up in front of Sharon Matthews' house, which was 3 streets over from mine. I watched from my front window as 2 deputies got out and walked to her door. My phone rang. It was Patricia. "Turn on the local news," she said. "Channel 3. I grabbed my remote and switched on the TV. The news anchor was in the middle of a story. Breaking news from Scottsdale, where the former president of a homeowners association has been arrested on multiple felony charges related to the alleged theft of HOA funds. The screen cut to footage of Sharon being led out of her house in handcuffs. She was crying, her carefully maintained appearance destroyed by tears and smeared makeup. The reporter continued. Sharon Matthews, 52, was arrested this afternoon and charged with 11 counts of fraud, 7 counts of theft, and 3 counts of money laundering. The charges stem from an investigation into financial irregularities at the Pinehurst Springs Homeowners Association, where Matthews served as president until last month. The Attorney General's office alleges that Matthews embezzled more than $140,000 in HOA funds over an 18-month period, funneling the money to companies owned by family members. I sat down heavily on my couch. Seeing Sharon arrested was surreal, even though I had known it was coming. "Zach, you still there?" Patricia's voice came from my phone. "Yeah, I'm here. I just watched them take her away. The AG's office called me this morning to give me a heads up. They moved quickly once they reviewed all the evidence you provided. She's being arraigned tomorrow, and they're asking for a $100,000 bond because of the amount of money involved. What happens now? She'll either make bail or sit in jail until trial. Either way, the criminal case will proceed. For our purposes, this strengthens our civil case to recover the funds. We'll file suit against Sharon, her son, her brother-in-law, and anyone else who received HOA money fraudulently. Over the next few weeks, life in Pinehurst Springs gradually returned to a new normal. Robert Chen and Carol Young were appointed to fill the vacant board seats. Together with Margaret, Dennis, and me, we formed a functional board focused on transparency and accountability. we discovered additional problems that Sharon had been covering up or ignoring. The pool needed significant repairs that had been deferred for years. Several common area light fixtures were broken and potentially dangerous. And the landscaping company that Sharon had fired 2 years ago, which had actually been doing good work, had been replaced with her brother-in-law's company that did essentially nothing. I spent countless hours working with our management company to address these issues. We got competitive bids for the pool repairs, hired a new landscaping company that actually showed up and maintained our common areas, and fixed the safety issues with the lighting. The special election, monitored by an independent third party as Judge Reese had ordered, took place in mid-December. I ran for one of the open seats, as did Margaret, Robert, Carol, and Dennis. We were opposed by a slate of candidates who, somewhat incredibly, were Sharon's friends and argued that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion. The election wasn't close. Our slate won by overwhelming margins. I received 189 votes out of 203 ballots cast, the highest total of any candidate. At the first meeting of the newly elected board, my fellow board members unanimously voted to make me president on a permanent basis. Sharon's criminal trial was scheduled for March, but her attorney worked out a plea deal in February. She pleaded guilty to 7 counts of felony theft and was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though her attorney acknowledged that she had no assets left after spending the money she had stolen. We had better luck with the civil case. Sharon's son Trevor's bank accounts were frozen, and we recovered about $38,000. Her brother-in-law's company had some assets that we were able to seize, recovering another $21,000. In total, we got back about $64,000, less than half of what was stolen, but better than nothing. The recovered funds allowed us to complete the pool repairs and catch up on deferred maintenance. By the time spring arrived, Pinehurst Springs looked better than it had in years. The landscaping was actually maintained. The pool was repaired and repainted. The tennis courts were finally resurfaced. And most importantly, the homeowners actually trusted their HOA board again. I learned a lot through the whole experience about both the worst and best of human nature. I saw how someone like Sharon could rationalize stealing from her neighbors, convincing herself that she deserved the money, or that it wasn't really stealing if it went to her family. I saw how fear and apathy could allow corruption to flourish, as people like Margaret and Dennis stayed silent even when they knew something was wrong. But I also saw how a community could come together when given the truth and an opportunity to make things right. I saw people like Robert Chen volunteer countless hours to help expose fraud and restore accountability. I saw homeowners show up to meetings and demand better from their elected representatives. And I saw how the legal system, when it worked properly, could actually deliver justice. On a warm evening in April, almost 7 months after that meeting where Sharon had tried to force me off the board, I stood at the community center hosting our spring social. Families were gathered around the pool, which sparkled with new tile and fresh paint. Kids were playing on the tennis courts. The smell of barbecue filled the air from the grills that Robert Chen was manning with his characteristic attention to detail. Margaret Silverman walked over to me with a plate of food. "You did good, Zach. This place feels like a real community again." "We all did good," I said. "I couldn't have done any of it alone." "Maybe not. But you were willing to stand up when it would have been easier to just go along. A lot of people wouldn't have done that." I looked around at my neighbors laughing and talking, at kids playing and people enjoying the community amenities that their assessment fees were actually paying for now. It had been a long and difficult fight, but it had been worth it. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Patricia Donovan, who was still handling some of the remaining legal issues related to the Sharon Matthews case. The subject line read, "Final recovery payment received." I opened the email and read, "Zach, good news. The last of the seized assets from Verd Landscape Solutions were liquidated today. We received an additional $8,400, bringing our total recovery to $72,400. All funds have been transferred to the HOA's operating account. I'll send over the final accounting and close out my files on this case. It's been a pleasure working with you. Let me know if you ever need help with anything else, though hopefully your HOA runs smoothly from now on." I smiled and typed back a quick thank you. $72,000 wasn't the full amount Sharon had stolen, but it was enough to make a real difference. It was enough to prove that fighting for what was right could actually lead to tangible results. Dennis Porter called out from across the pool area. "Hey, Mr. President, we're running low on ice. Can you grab some from the storage room?" "On it," I called back, laughing at the gentle mockery in his use of my title. As I walked to the storage room, I thought about how strange it was that a simple desire to fix some drainage problems in my cul-de-sac had led to all of this. I had never wanted to be HOA president. I had never imagined I would be involved in exposing fraud and testifying in court. But when I saw something wrong, I couldn't just look away. The storage room was in the back of the community center, a small concrete space that stayed cool even in Arizona heat. I grabbed 2 bags of ice and was heading back out when I heard voices from the parking lot. Curious, I peeked out the door and saw Sharon Matthews standing next to a car, talking to someone I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to duck back inside and avoid a confrontation. Sharon was out on bail pending her sentencing, which wouldn't happen for another month. But something about the way she was gesturing animatedly made me pause and listen. "I'm telling you, there's more money," Sharon was saying. "I have about $25,000 in an account he doesn't know about. Once this all dies down, we can access it." The other person, a woman with short red hair, shook her head. "Sharon, you need to let this go. You're facing prison time. Don't make it worse." "How can it get worse?" Sharon's voice was bitter. "That bastard Garrison destroyed my life. Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone. All because he couldn't mind his own business." I felt a flash of anger. Even now, even after being caught and charged and facing prison, Sharon saw herself as the victim. She had stolen from hundreds of families, and somehow I was the bad guy for exposing her. The woman with red hair saw me standing in the doorway and her eyes widened. "Sharon, we should go." Sharon turned and saw me. For a moment neither of us said anything, then her face twisted with rage. "You," she spat. "You're probably so proud of yourself. You destroyed my reputation, you got me arrested, you turned everyone against me." "You did that to yourself," I said quietly. "I just made sure the truth came out." "The truth? You want to talk about truth? You were jealous of me from the moment you joined the board. You couldn't stand that I was the one in charge, so you dug around until you found something you could twist into a scandal. Sharon, you stole $140,000. That's not a scandal I twisted. That's a crime you committed. I provided services to this community for years, and I barely got compensated for my time. That money was owed to me. That's not how it works, and you know it. You stole from your neighbors, from families who trusted you." Sharon took a step toward me, and the red-haired woman grabbed her arm. "Sharon, don't. Let's just go." "I hope you enjoy playing president," Sharon said, her voice venomous. "Because when I'm done fighting these charges, I'm coming after you. Defamation, harassment, malicious prosecution. I'll sue you for everything you have. Your attorney already tried that threat." Patricia laughed at him. "Everything I reported was true and documented. You can't sue someone for telling the truth." "We'll see about that." The red-haired woman practically dragged Sharon to the car and they drove off. I stood there for a moment, the bags of ice dripping cold water onto my hands, trying to process what I had just heard. Sharon had mentioned another hidden account with $25,000. That was information I needed to pass on to the Attorney General's office and to Patricia. If Sharon was hiding assets while claiming she couldn't pay restitution, that could result in additional charges. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia, but it went to voicemail. I left a message explaining what I had overheard and asking her to call me back. When I returned to the pool area with the ice, Robert Chen noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" Just ran into Sharon in the parking lot. "She's still claiming she did nothing wrong." Robert shook his head. "Some people are incapable of taking responsibility. It's always someone else's fault." She also mentioned something about having another $25,000 in a hidden account. I left a message for Patricia. "If that's true, they'll find it. The forensic audit was pretty thorough, but there are always ways to hide money if you're determined enough. Bank accounts in other states, cryptocurrency, cash in a safe deposit box. But if she's dumb enough to talk about it in a parking lot, she'll probably be dumb enough to get caught." The party continued into the evening, and I tried to put the encounter with Sharon out of my mind. This was supposed to be a celebration of how far our community had come, not a reminder of the ugly battles we had fought. Patricia called me back the next morning. "I got your message. Definitely report this to the AG's investigator assigned to Sharon's case. If she's hiding assets, that's relevant to both the criminal case and the restitution order. Will they actually be able to find it? If it exists, probably. Asset searches are pretty sophisticated these days. And if Sharon is stupid enough to try to access that money before her case is resolved, they'll catch her." 2 weeks later, Sharon was arrested again. Apparently, the Attorney General's investigators had been monitoring her activities after my report about the hidden account. Sharon had attempted to withdraw $15,000 in cash from an account at a credit union in Temp that she had opened under her maiden name. The account had been funded with HOA money that Sharon had transferred to herself 2 years earlier, before anyone was paying attention to the finances. The new charges were filed, and Sharon's bail was revoked. Her attorney withdrew from the case, apparently having not been paid. Sharon sat in county jail for 3 months until her trial date, at which point she pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a slightly reduced sentence. The final sentence was 6 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 3 years. Full restitution was ordered, including the money from the newly discovered account, which was seized and returned to the HOA. By the time summer arrived, the Sharon Matthews saga had finally ended. Our HOA had recovered over $97,000 in total, enough to cover most of what had been stolen. The community was thriving. Assessment rates had actually been reduced slightly once our finances were properly managed. And most importantly, people trusted their HOA board again. I served as president for 2 more years before deciding not to run for re-election. I was proud of what we had accomplished, but I was also ready to let someone else take the lead. Carol Young ran for president and won easily. She was smart, dedicated, and had learned a lot about HOA governance during her time on the board. My last act as president was to present a proposal to the board that we name the community center after Robert Chen, who had donated countless volunteer hours to help expose the fraud and restore the HOA's integrity. The board voted unanimously in favor, and we held a ceremony in June where we unveiled a plaque that read, Robert Chen Community Center, dedicated to those who serve their neighbors with integrity and dedication. Robert tried to protest, saying he didn't deserve the honor, but everyone knew better. He had been just as important to saving our community as I had been. On my last day as president, I sat in my home office and drafted one final email to all homeowners. I summarized what we had accomplished over the past 2 years, restored financial integrity, improved our community amenities, implemented transparent governance practices, and most importantly, rebuilt trust between homeowners and their elected representatives. I concluded the email with this. Serving as your HOA president has been one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my life. I learned that standing up for what's right is rarely easy, but it's always worth it. I learned that corruption thrives in darkness but withers in the light of transparency. And I learned that when good people work together, they can overcome even the most daunting challenges. Thank you for your trust and support. Please give Carol and the new board the same support you gave me. I hit send and closed my laptop. It was done. My time as HOA president was over, and I was surprised to find that I felt both relief and a touch of sadness. That evening, Patricia Donovan called me one last time. Zach, I just wanted to let you know that Sharon Matthews was officially transferred to state prison today. She'll serve her sentence at Perryville, the women's facility in Goodyear. I thought you'd want to know. How long until she's eligible for parole? Minimum 3 years, but honestly, given the nature of her crimes and the fact that she tried to hide assets even after being charged, I'd be surprised if she gets out that early. She'll probably serve most of the 6 years. Thanks for letting me know. And Patricia, thank you for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without your help. You did the hard part, Zach. You were the one who had the courage to speak up when you saw something wrong. You were the one who gathered the evidence and fought back when they tried to silence you. I just helped with the legal paperwork. It was more than paperwork, and you know it. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you. If you ever need anything, or if your HOA runs into trouble again, you know where to find me. Hopefully we won't need you again, but I appreciate it. After we hung up, I walked out to my back patio and looked out at the Pinehurst Springs neighborhood. The sun was setting over the mountains in the distance, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I could hear kids playing in the distance, and the sound of someone's music drifting on the evening air. This was what a healthy community was supposed to look like. People living their lives, trusting that the systems designed to serve them were actually doing their jobs. It seemed like such a simple thing, but as I had learned, it required constant vigilance and people willing to stand up when something went wrong. My phone buzzed with responses to my final email as president. Message after message thanking me for my service, expressing gratitude for what we had accomplished and wishing me well. Reading through them, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I had never wanted to be HOA president. I had never imagined I would spend months of my life investigating fraud, fighting in court, and rebuilding a broken organization. But when the moment came to either stand up or look away, I had stood up. And that, more than any title or recognition, was something I could be proud of. The Pinehurst Springs HOA would continue long after my involvement. New residents would move in, new board members would be elected, new challenges would arise. But the foundation of transparency and accountability that we had rebuilt would hopefully endure. The lessons learned from Sharon Matthews' crimes would serve as a warning to anyone tempted to abuse their position for personal gain. As for me, I was content to return to being a regular homeowner. I would stay involved. attend meetings when important issues arose, and support the new board however I could. But the daily work of running the HOA would fall to others now. I thought about Sharon sometimes, sitting in her prison cell in Goodyear, probably still convinced that she had been wronged. I felt no satisfaction in her imprisonment, but I didn't regret my actions either. She had made her choices, and justice had been served. The story of what happened at Pinehurst Springs HOA spread throughout Arizona and even gained some national attention. I did a few interviews with local news stations, and a reporter from a national publication who was writing about HOA corruption. The story resonated with people because HOA disputes are so common, but few people are willing or able to fight back effectively. I tried to use that platform to encourage others facing similar situations. My message was always the same. Document everything, know your rights, get professional help when needed, and don't be intimidated by people who abuse their authority. Several people from other HOAs reached out to me asking for advice on their own situations. I did what I could to help, connecting them with Patricia or other attorneys who specialized in HOA law, explaining how to conduct proper audits, and encouraging them to stand firm in defense of what was right. On what would have been Sharon Matthews' 54th birthday in August, about 3 months after I left office as HOA president, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was the Arizona State Prison Complex in Goodyear. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten in surprisingly neat script on lined paper. Mr. Garrison, I am writing this letter because my therapist suggested it might help with my rehabilitation. I don't expect you to respond or even to read this, but I need to say it anyway. What I did was wrong. I stole money that didn't belong to me, and I hurt a lot of people who trusted me. For a long time, I told myself that I deserved that money for all the work I did for the HOA. I convinced myself that it wasn't really stealing because I was providing value. But that was a lie I told myself to justify my actions. The truth is that I was greedy and entitled, and I thought I was too smart to get caught. You were right to investigate and expose what I did. You were right to fight back when I tried to silence you. I destroyed my own life, not you. I hope the community is doing well. I hope the damage I caused has been repaired. And I hope that someday I can be a better person than I was. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did wrong. Sharon Matthews. I read the letter 3 times, trying to decide if it was genuine or just another manipulation. Ultimately, I decided it didn't matter. Whether Sharon had actually experienced genuine remorse or was just going through the motions for the benefit of a parole board 3 years from now, the outcome was the same. She was in prison, the stolen money had been recovered, and the HOA was functioning properly. I filed the letter away and didn't respond. There was nothing I needed to say to Sharon Matthews. Life moved on. Carol Young proved to be an excellent HOA president, running efficient meetings and making smart decisions about community management. The new board continued the practices of transparency and accountability that we had established. Financial statements were published monthly. All contracts were put out for competitive bid, and board members were prohibited from doing business with the HOA. 2 years after I left office, I attended the annual HOA meeting as a regular homeowner. Carol gave a presentation on the state of the community, highlighting the various improvements that had been made and the healthy financial position we were in. Assessment rates had remained stable. Reserves were fully funded, And satisfaction surveys showed that over 90% of residents were happy with how the HOA was being managed. During the question and answer period, a newer resident who had moved in recently raised his hand. I keep hearing references to the Sharon Matthews situation and how things were bad before. Can someone explain what happened? Carol looked at me, and I nodded slightly. She gave a brief, diplomatic explanation of the fraud that had occurred and how the community had worked together to address it. She didn't mention my specific role, which I appreciated. But Robert Chen, who was still serving on the board, added, "What Carol didn't mention is that the person who exposed the fraud and led the fight to fix our HOA is sitting right there." He pointed at me. Zachary Garrison put his neck on the line to do the right thing when it would have been easier to stay quiet. We owe him a debt of gratitude. The room erupted in applause, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I gave a small wave and tried to shrink into my seat. After the meeting, the new resident came up to me. "I had no idea. Thank you for what you did. My family and I moved here because we heard good things about this community, but we had no idea there was such a dramatic backstory." "I'm glad you're happy here," I said. "That's what matters now. The drama is over, and we have a great community." Walking back to my house that night, I reflected on how much had changed in 4 years. When I had first discovered the financial irregularities, I had no idea where it would lead. I certainly never imagined being appointed as temporary president by a judge, testifying in criminal proceedings, or becoming a minor local celebrity for fighting HOA corruption. But the most important change wasn't about me. It was about Pinehurst Springs and the hundreds of families who lived here. We had gone from a community where corruption was allowed to flourish because people were afraid to speak up, to a community where transparency and accountability were the norm. That was worth all the stress and conflict I had endured. I still served on HOA committees occasionally, lending my experience where it could be helpful. But I was happy to let others take the lead. I had done my part, and now it was time for the next generation of community leaders to carry the torch forward. 5 years after Sharon Matthews was sent to prison, I saw a brief mention in the local news that she had been granted parole. She had served 3.5 years of her 6-year sentence and was being released under supervision. According to the article, she would be on probation for the remainder of her sentence and would continue making restitution payments. I wondered what her life would be like now. Her reputation was destroyed. She would struggle to find employment with multiple felony convictions. Her relationships with her family had reportedly been shattered by the scandal. She had lost everything because of her greed and sense of entitlement. Part of me hoped she had genuinely learned from her mistakes and would find a way to rebuild her life in a positive direction. But mostly, I just felt grateful that she was no longer my problem. The Pinehurst Springs HOA continued to thrive. New board members were elected, bringing fresh ideas and energy. The community grew and evolved, but the core values of transparency and integrity remained constant. And me. I went back to being just another homeowner, living my life, enjoying my neighbors, and appreciating the community we had all worked together to build. The drainage issues in my cul-de-sac that had originally motivated me to join the board had been fixed years ago. My initial goal had been accomplished, but I had gained something much more valuable than functioning storm drains. I had learned that ordinary people can make an extraordinary difference when they have the courage to stand up for what's right. I had learned that corruption thrives on silence and dies in the light of truth. And I had learned that a community is only as strong as the people who are willing to fight for it. Those lessons would stay with me for the rest of my life, long after my time as HOA president had faded into memory and become just another story that older residents told to newcomers about the time things went wrong and how we fixed them together.